Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today I'm coming to you from the comfort of my living room. I'd thought of making this video at the park today because it's a nice sunny day outside and it's not too cold, but I decided that for this review I'd probably need a little bit of table space because there's a lot more involved with this camera than there is with some of the other cameras which I've done videos about. The subject of today's video is going to be the Mamiya RB67, and in this case the Pro S version, which was released in 1974. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras from my online store, japanvintagecamera.com. I have an Etsy store which is also called Japan Vintage Camera. So if you'd like to buy this Mamiya or another vintage Japanese camera, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. Before I get started talking about this camera, I thought I'd make a comment about shipping. This week I've received a lot of messages at my stores about shipping, people not being able to track their orders and things like that. And this is due to a problem with UPS's main Asian hub, which is located in Shenzhen, China. And there's kind of a staff shortage there due to the recent Omicron situation. And that kind of affects us here in Japan. For the past year or so, whenever I ship something from Japan, I have to put everything in an open box with all the documents, and they are picked up by the shipping agents, and then they are taken to UPS and then to customs. And these boxes cannot be sealed until they are inspected by, agents or customs, due to another, pandemic problem of people trying to export counterfeit vaccines and things like that. So this, in addition to the delays in Shenzhen, have caused a delay in tracking. And it's taking a few days, sometimes a week, before people can track their packages. And shipping now is taking between 10 and 14 days instead of the week which it usually takes. So for those who've experienced this problem or have concerns about it, that's the situation here. We're looking forward to things getting hopefully more back to normal soon, and hopefully get back to the point where I can use EMS once again, which was a far faster and more efficient system. But anyway, so let's go ahead and get started with the subject of today's camera, the Mamiya RB67. I got everything I need here. One thing I needed for this demonstration was a small cable release and something to drink. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I said, the Mamiya RB67 Pro S was introduced in 1974. And it quickly became a favorite of photography studios around the world. You can find this camera just about everywhere. And back in November, my family went to the New Otani Hotel, which is not far from where we are here, for what is called the Shichigo-san celebration. And Shichigo-san is where you take your 3, 5, or 7-year-old child, 3 and 7 if they are girls, and 5 if they are boys. Shichigo stands for 7, 5, and 3. And you take them to the shrine for a blessing and good luck. And the children dress up in traditional Japanese outfits. They look very cute, and it's a good time to take photos. And a lot of places, photography studios and hotels and such, have kind of an industry around these events, and also with weddings and things like that. And the hotel we went to was pretty much very deep into this Shichigo-san thing. So we went there, and our daughter was able to try out a large variety of kimonos and obis and hair accessories and shoes and bags and this and that and the other. And you rent these things for an entire day to make your, appearance at the shrine, and also for the photographs. And anyway, about half the photos are done outdoors in the beautiful gardens at the New Otani Hotel, and the other half are done indoors in the extensive photo studio, or should I say studios. There's at least 4 large studios in this hotel, mainly for people getting married and such. Wedding industry is a big industry here in Japan. And inside these studios, I was surprised to see that they were still using the Mamiya RB67 in addition to their more modern digital equipment. And I was surprised that nearly 50 years or so after the RB67 was introduced, that it was still in use by such a serious photo studio as that at the New Otani Hotel. And that just goes to show you what a wonderful camera this is and how relevant it remains after all this time. So, this video is going to be done in several different parts. It's going to be a rather long video because this camera has a lot of interesting features and quirks, and I'd like to go over all of those. A lot of you might be interested in buying a camera like this. Maybe some of you already have one or have come across one and need some information to know how it works. Or perhaps you might want to buy this one and would like to know how it works. So let's go ahead and take a break for a moment, and we'll come back and get started. All right, so let's go ahead and take a more detailed look at the Mamiya RB67. And what I'm going to do with this camera is I'm going to disassemble it into its basic components, and I will describe how each and every one of these components work. When I do reviews on cameras, I usually start at the top of the camera, and that's what I'm going to do in the case of this one. At the top of the Mamiya RB67 is going to be the focusing hood or prism, depending on how your camera is, I guess, configured. This one has the standard waist level finder, which you open by simply pulling up the hood like so. And if you look inside, you can see the focusing screen. To allow for more precise focus, there is a magnifier or focusing loop built in, and you actuate that by pushing this lever here, and that causes it to pop open like so. And this lens here is removable. You can turn it and lift it and remove it, and this allows you to use different lenses with different magnification or diopter adjustments. And not exactly easy accessories to find nowadays, but surprisingly some of the larger camera shops around here in Tokyo often have new accessories and parts for these cameras, so that they're popular enough that there's still a demand for this kind of stuff. To close this, you simply push down. You don't have to touch on the glass, that'll leave fingerprints. You can push down next to it, squeeze these together, and simply fold this back like so. Now, as I said, these cameras were available with other types of finders, prism finders, meter finders, and things like that. So to change finders, of course, you have to remove them or remove the old one. It's quite easy on this camera. You simply push this little button here under the nameplate, and then the nameplate you push to the side. You can see it kind of moving as I push it, and if you push it to the left, it just lifts off. I'll go ahead and set that to the side. Underneath that, we have the focusing screen. The focusing screen is interchangeable. You simply lift it out like so. Whoever owned this camera before wrote these lines here on the back of the focusing screen. Thankfully, he didn't use a permanent marker, so I'll be able to clean that off easily enough. And as I said, besides a variety of different finders for these cameras, a variety of different focusing screens were also made. Underneath that, we have these kind of orange bars here, which move in and out a little bit. So these kind of an adjustment showing the north and south borders, I guess, to the image when you're looking through the viewfinder. So let's go ahead and move to the next part. And the next part, we're going to talk about the lens. All right. So pretty much the heart to any camera is going to be the lens, because you need the lens in order to project the image onto the film. And in a medium format camera like the RB67, it's even more important because much of the camera's mechanism is built into the lens. To remove the lens, you have to make sure that the shutter is cocked by pushing this lever forward. This one is already cocked. And turning the lock ring on the base of the lens and simply pulling the lens off like so. Now, Mamiya made a large variety of lenses for the RB system, from the 50mm wide-angle lens up to the 360mm super telephoto, and a lot of other lenses in between. Of all the lenses, I think maybe the 90mm is my favorite. It's a really good focal length, probably something like maybe 45mm focal length in 35mm format. It gives you a little bit wider angle view than, say, the standard 100 or 105mm lens. It makes it a little bit more suitable for shooting indoors or things like that. This is a really wonderful lens, and this one here is in particularly good condition. It's really dusty and dirty because I haven't cleaned this camera up yet. It's going to go onto my bench in a couple of days. But still, I like when I come across these cameras and they don't have any fungus or haze or anything like that. On the positive side, if they do have fungus or haze on the inside, you can remove it by simply unscrewing the rear element here with a rubber stop or something. That allows you to kind of get inside with a cotton swab and some cleaner and clean it out. So, as I mentioned before, there's a lock ring on this lens. When the lens is off of the camera, make sure that you have this red dot on the ring lined up with the red arrow on the lens body. That makes it easy to put it back on the camera. You don't have to fumble around with aligning it. Let's go ahead and look at the other features and stuff on the lens. On this side here we have what is a little round knob which turns one way or the other, and it says mirror up. This is the mirror up, I guess, option or a mirror lockup system, which allows you to take a photograph without the mirror moving. And this is allows you to eliminate the potential for image blur when shooting at certain shutter speeds. I'll explain how this works later on in the video when I'm describing how to operate the camera. The next thing here we have is a selector switch, which switches between the manual and X-Sync modes. And conveniently next to that is the PC sync socket for attaching a flash. These cameras were generally used in the studio, so you would plug your studio flash into this socket. Or you could use a handheld flash with a flash bracket which attached the camera, which allows you to use it handheld, though I don't know many people who shoot handheld medium format with a flash nowadays. Moving further down the lens, we have this lever here, which is a stop-down lever, and this allows you to preview your depth of field. You set your aperture here, and as you move this, it stops down the aperture blades, and you can see them moving as I move the lever. And this allows you to see how much depth of field you have at any given aperture or the aperture you have selected. Moving in front of that, we have the aperture ring itself, which is arranged in, looks like, half stops. And in front of that, we have the shutter speed ring, which has a range of speeds from T and 1 second up to 1/400th of a second. The T setting allows you to fire the shutter, and the shutter will stay open until you turn it to another speed. So this is something which is really good for really long exposures. With these cameras with a small aperture and small film, you can, and limited light, you can take exposures in really dark situations of several minutes long. And so this is something you can use for that. And so that's something I don't use a lot because I usually shoot cameras handheld, but on those really rare occasions when I'm not using like a 35mm camera with a really good built-in meter which will automatically do that, this is a handy feature. In the front here we have this little thing here, another set of numbers. This is the depth of field, I guess, calculator, and you operate this calculator using this tab on the bottom, and as you turn this tab, it turns the focusing distance up or down, and you can look at the focusing distance and this depth of field scale and see how much depth of field you have for these different apertures. For me, I think this is kind of a pointless thing which isn't really necessary because they could have simply worked that into, I think, these dials here or onto this location. Probably someone, the boss's son or something, had a really good idea for a feature to add to these cameras and decided that this would be a good idea. For myself, it's a little bit pointless, and if I need to know how much depth of field I have, it's simple enough just to use the depth of field preview lever. So that's it for my review of the lens. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is the film back and how it operates and such. So let's take a break for a minute and I'll be right back. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the film back or film holder, or I don't know, film control system. Maybe that's a good way to describe it. So this particular camera is fitted with a 6x4.5 film back. The standard format of this camera is 6x7 centimeters. You can shoot also in 6x6 or 6x4.5 depending on which back you are using. And if you're using the Mamiya, roll film holders, you can use the K-type back, which shoots in I guess 6x45, 6x6, and 6x9. Though you can't really use a 6x9 back with this camera. You can use the but you can use the first two settings, 6x45 and 6x6. Removing the film back is quite easy, so long as you remember to keep the film dark slide in place. If you have the dark slide out and you try to take the film back off, it won't come off. It has a safety feature to prevent you from accidentally exposing the film. If you go ahead and put it in, you can pull the levers on the top and the bottom. There's an arrow showing which way to do it, and they come out like so. So this is the film back, and inside it contains a film cartridge. And I'll show how to load the film cartridge in just a moment. Before I get to that part, we'll take a look at this piece here on the back of the camera, and this is a film back adapter. Now, if you're buying one of these cameras on eBay or something like that, make sure that it has the correct adapter on it. On occasion, I've bought lots of cameras and things like that, and I have an RB67 arrive only to find that it doesn't have the adapter, and without the adapter you can't put the film back on it. You also have to make sure that it has the correct adapter, because a couple of different ones were made. There was the standard RB adapter, this is the RB, and this is the Pro S version, which has kind of like a protection against accidental double exposures. The standard version works fine, and there was a version which allowed you to use the Mamiya press film holders, and which I mentioned previously. So if you have one for the Mamiya press holders, this one's not going to work. A lot of people prefer the Mamiya press holders because they hold the film more flat than the RB style holders, and the flatter you can get the film, the more accurate your focus is going to be and the sharper your images are going to be. So I've never actually shot the press film backs on the RB, though I have shot the press cameras themselves a lot. The RB, I think, is a kind of a bulky enough camera without having to use the press backs on it. If you are using the press back, you can also use the Fuji instant film backs or Polaroid backs. I know that Fuji stopped producing their pack film 3 or 4 years ago. The film, which is fairly recently expired, like less than 7 or 8 years old, usually works quite fine. If it's older and it's been very carefully stored, it may be good for maybe up to 10 years or so. Anything older than that, you're not likely to get good performance out of it. On the positive side, there's a company in Europe which is now making pack film which will fit in these film backs. It's a little bit on the expensive side, and you only get, I think, like 3 exposures per pack instead of the 10 which you get out of a Fuji. But hopefully, if there's interest and they improve their, I guess, manufacturing, they'll be able to add more exposures and perhaps lower the cost. So I'll go ahead and move this aside here, and the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to load the film in the film back. So with the dark slide in place, simply pull down on this lever here like you do on the back door to many 35mm cameras. And here you have the film cartridge, which comes out of this shell. In the film cartridge, you should have a take-up spool. Whenever I sell a camera, I always make sure that it has a take-up spool. If you don't have a take-up spool in your camera, you bought a camera without one, you're going to need a take-up spool in order to put film in the camera. Now we have the take-up spool here. We have a couple of these long buttons here which are used to push up and down the guides which hold the film spools. And there are other pins on the top, the guides where these don't move, which are the important guides, or I guess the main guides for the film spool. I have a dummy roll of film here. It's actually just a roll of film backing paper, which doesn't have any film in it. It's easier for me to demonstrate that way, and I don't have to waste an expensive roll of film. So, when you are loading this film back, it's a little bit different than how it is done on TLR or other kind of medium format camera, because the film has to go over this backwards. It's not, the film isn't facing with the paper rolling this way and the film facing this way. The paper has to be rolled kind of the opposite way. And when you first load one of these cameras, like I have a Mamiya 7 II, which is quite an expensive and professional level camera. And when I got it, I found out that someone had put the film in backwards and had sold it because they couldn't make it work. And your camera's not going to work if your medium format camera, if you put in the film and the paper is facing toward the lens rather than the film itself. You think someone who spends thousands of dollars on a Mamiya 7 II would know that you have to be careful loading the film or know how to load it, but apparently that's not the case. So anyway, take your film, and when you have the film, you can see the paper here. In a TLR camera, you would kind of load it this way. In this camera, we're going to load it in the opposite way. So the colored side of the paper goes and rolls on the roller here, and the black side of the paper is on the top. So I'll go ahead and put it in like so on the top pin, or try to anyway. Push up the lever, and okay, the film is in place, and then simply pull it around like so, all the way around, and as you can see, it's black. If it has any writing on it, you've got it backwards. Roll it back up and turn it around and do it the other way. Pull this around here and feed the leader of the film into the take-up spool, and when you have it inside, sometimes it's easier said than done, especially when I'm trying to demonstrate something. Let me turn it up a little bit. That might make it a little easier. There's a comment my grandfather used to have for situations like this, but it's a little R-rated, so I won't say it. And simply turn that, and you can see the writing, or I guess the marks on the paper here. What you want to do is, next you're going to find this little white triangle where my finger is pointing. Maybe you can see it here, just under my finger. And you're going to turn the film. And as you turn it, you see this white arrow coming out. And you want to turn it until that arrow is lined up with the arrow here. And that means that you've reached the start point. So when you've reached that point, take the cartridge, put it in like so, close it tight and latch it into place, and then simply start winding, and just keep winding and winding and winding. It takes a few turns until it stops, and the number 1 will be shown in the window, and this film back is ready to go. So let's take a break, and in a moment I'll put the camera back together and show you how to use it. Alright, welcome back. Let's go ahead and put the camera back together, and I'll show you how to use it. So I'll take the camera body, lift it this way, push down the lever on the bottom, and attach the film back adapter and lock it into place by pushing that flush. Next, take your film back, make sure that these are pushed all the way to the ends, drop it on like so, and lock it into place. Take the focusing screen, sit it on the top like that, and with the faceplate still pulled over to the left side, carefully set the focusing hood on top. Make sure it's seated down, because sometimes the back doesn't catch when you're putting these on, and you'll think you've got it going, and then you'll lift this up and the whole thing comes out. That's not fun when that happens. Okay, that's on properly. Next thing to do is, put on the lens and line up the red marks with this red dot here, and turn it and lock it into place. So everything here is ready to go, and I have the camera set. The film is wound to the first exposure, and the shutter is wound, but when I push the shutter button, nothing happens. Nothing happens because I have the slide in. Remember, for the camera to operate and work, you have to remove the dark slide. And this is the same with other medium format cameras like the Hasselblad and such. This has to be removed in order for the camera to work. So, as I said, I'm going to show you how to take a photograph with this camera. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus and compose on the subject. So lift up the focusing hood and pop open the focusing loop. And then, while looking through the focusing loop, carefully focus the camera. As you are focusing the camera, you'll notice as you focus to things which are closer and closer, the lens moves further and further out. And the farther out the lens goes, the closer your subject is. And the RB67 can focus out a long ways because it has this flexible bellows here. And this allows you to focus on things really closely and get a lot of magnification. So you can actually do a fair amount of, say, macro style photography with this camera for flowers and things like that. And in Japan, this camera is especially popular for that kind of photography. So once you have the camera focused and your subject composed, say you have this camera set up on a tripod, the next thing you need to do is set your aperture and shutter speed. So if I'm shooting, when you're shooting in daylight with a medium format camera and it's on a tripod, I would select like a very tight aperture, say f16, f22. Diffraction is less of an issue on larger formats than it is on 35mm cameras. You can stop down one of these cameras a lot more than a 35mm camera for a more depth of field without worrying about diffraction. Then set your shutter speed. And so we have the camera set, the shutter speed, the aperture, the focus, the composition is ready. The next thing to do is to take a photo. Now the shutter is already charged, so I'll remove the film back. And then I simply press the shutter button and the camera takes a photograph. To take another photograph, I will charge the shutter and recharge the reflex mirror. I will wind the film to the next exposure. These are not combined. You have to do both of these separately, just as you would on a Mamiya press camera. There's a locking lever here. Pull it over once, the little light here will change. There's an indicator that lets you know when it's ready to turn. Turn it like so. Let it go. And the camera is ready to take another exposure, just like that. When you are done shooting, you can close up the camera and replace the dark slide. The good thing about this camera is you can change film types or film formats by simply putting in the dark slide and replacing the back with something else. Whatever you want to use the film back with a different kind of film. Say you want to switch from color to black and white, or black and white to slide film, or from 6x4.5 to 6x7. You can do that in just a few moments with this camera if you have a collection of the different film backs. So let's go ahead and take a break for a moment, and the last thing I'm going to show you is how to use the mirror up system in this camera, which as I mentioned before is a little bit tricky for some people. Alright, let's go ahead and get started, and I said I was going to show you how to use the mirror lockup system. Now the mirror lockup system is used on these cameras because say at studio speeds, kind of like in the mid-range of shutter speeds, not too slow, not too fast, the motion of the mirror can cause some vibration in the camera, which some people say can cause an amount of blur on your image. It's not something I've ever experienced when using one of these cameras, but I suppose if you're looking through a powerful loop at an image, you might be able to detect something like that. At really long shutter speeds, the mirror slap is irrelevant. At faster shutter speeds, it's not going to make any difference. But at the more common speeds, there's the possibility that the motion or mirror slap might move the camera enough to affect the images. So in order to eliminate that, Mamiya came up with this really complicated and hard to use mirror up system. So the way it works is you're going to need a cable release. You cannot use the mirror up system without a cable release. So the first thing to do is install the cable release. It doesn't go in the shutter button, it actually goes right in the middle of this switch on the side of the lens. A lot of people have these lenses and have no idea that you can put a cable release on this part of the lens. But and some of these lenses are so full of dust there, you wouldn't even be able to see where it went. So I have the cable attached. I'll go ahead and charge the shutter. And I'll go ahead and take off the viewfinder. It might make it a little easier to explain what's going on. So right now, as I'm looking, maybe you can kind of see in the image there that maybe that you can see the image being reflected through the focusing screen. When I fire the shutter button to charge it first, switch it over here. Do that first. All right. And now I look here and it's shiny. So what has happened is the mirror has locked up, but the shutter itself hasn't fired. And so to fire the shutter, I have to push the cable release, and it goes. Once again, I charge the shutter, and the mirror goes down, and I can focus on my subject. Push the shutter button again. The mirror is up, it's kind of reflecting through the focusing screen. Press the shutter release, like so, and the shutter fires. And that's how it works. And to disable it, just remove the cable and turn it back over to the red position. So that's it for my review here of the Mamiya RB67 Pro S camera from the 1970s. I hope you found it interesting. I plan to be doing some reviews on other recent acquisitions in the near future. If you'd like to see these, please subscribe. If you'd like to buy this camera or another camera, please check out my online stores. And if you like the video, please click the thumbs up button. The likes really help. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.